Okay. I believe we left off in chapter 6 somewhere, probably someplace along the line of trying to retrieve memories, however it is we go about that. But what I'm gonna ask something that's typically is really I would call it completely off topic, but I'm curious about something, not because I am worried about it so much as just curious. What is it about online working that deters people from taking notes? And that's a legitimate question. I'm truly curious. Now, if I'm sitting in front of you, people tend to take notes, but if you're on a video screen, people don't tend to take notes from what I've seen. What's that?
I personally take notes. Like I have.
Again, it's a curiosity question more than anything else.
Can you hear me?
What if okay, now if I wasn't recording, what would you do?
I take my books and highlight.
Okay. I guess the rest of those folks over in Vernon just sleep because they don't do anything. Doesn't look like they don't wave. They don't give me any indication that they have a heart rate. They just kind of sit there and chill. I mean, I get the rarest of one or two questions over there periodically. But otherwise, it's like, hey, you folks have a pulse over there? Yeah, I am getting a couple of chuckles today. Now, I also understand it's a little bit different because I haven't been over there. Had I been over there, it would have been, there's a little bit of something that changes when it comes to engagement that way. But because of the virus and all that other kind of craziness, going back and forth is a little bit prohibitive. But anyway, so if somebody takes notes while they watch the video, well, aren't y'all special? Y'all need lots of extra entertainment if y'all are watching a video of me. But anyway, I'm very thankful, but y'all need some better entertainment. Some retrieval cues related to memory. If we have something that helps us cue up basically a memory of some sort, they also refer to it as priming. Got to move this up a bit. And I made the reference the other day to the priming a carburetor in an older car. When we prime for a memory, we end up accessing a way that we have encoded the memory to start with. As a part of that, if you needed to recall, and this comes up in my testing all the time, if I gave you the sentence, the man lifted the piano, you would say, okay, so what, who cares? But if I say, if you're having trouble remembering that sentence, if I make reference to something heavy, the notion of something heavy might trigger somebody's memory for that. At the same time, if I said the man tuned the piano, if I made reference to something musical, that would be a reasonable hint. But again, part of it depends on what becomes a hint for the person who's trying to remember. That's the catch. What triggers a memory for me may not trigger the same sort of memory for you. That makes sense? You start to say something?
I had that happen in high school, I think, for definition on vocabulary. There was a definition of a dust storm. It's called a boom. And my mom, for me to remember it, she punched me in the chest. Just like lightly. And that helped me remember it. So from to this day forward, we would sometimes pass by and she'll just punch me and I'll just say dust storm.
Okay. There you go. You need to remember dust storm, get smacked in the chest, it'll help. Or at least it helps for some folks. You nursing students or folks who are going to be nursing students, if anybody in the room going to do the nursing gig? Okay. Now, how do you plan on trying to remember all of the information related to all of those medications? For real. It's like this drug does this, this, and this, and if you put this drug with that drug, somebody might die. How do you remember all of that distinguishing information? Seriously. Do you just memorize it and hope for the best and make sure and hope that you don't get them crossed over somewhere in your sleep or something?
Pretty much.
Okay, if that works, I mean, if that's what works. I mean, my daughter's in the middle of she's not taking a pharmacology class, but she's taking a test that's just finished taking the test that had an awful lot of pharmacology on it as a nursing student. And it's like, how do you keep all that crap in your head? But I know that she has dealt with pharmacology. She's never had a big difficulty dealing with medication stuff. I don't know why. That's one of her things. She can keep track of that stuff without too much trouble. She can come to our house and somebody will say something about some drug or whatever, and she can rattle off all kinds of crap related to that. So some things become very context specific to the individual. I remember processes better than I remember facts a lot of times. So it just depends on what it is you're working with. Again, be sure and remember that memories tend to be context dependent. When you can re-enter the state of mind you were in when you initially were exposed to the material, or at whichever time when you're trying to go over it or to relearn it, that sort of idea becomes very helpful. Now, if you need to recall a memory from a semantic perspective, that's when you're putting together different pieces for certain sorts of specific information. You can do what's called spreading the activation, which is another way of, in my mind anyway, referring to a bit of priming. You can activate one series of memories which engages a different set, which engages another set, and you end up with all this extra stuff flowing around in your brain. That sort of idea. So how do you make a memory? How do you some of y'all, I would suspect, are what we would call auditory learners. You do better by listening to information. Some of you do better with tactile touching things and writing information. I do better if I'm trying to do both. But the idea is that you figure out how it is you construct those memories best for you. How do you organize those facts? What do you use to fill in the gaps between facts when you're trying to remember those? How do you keep the dots connected, in other words? When we're constructing memories, please bear in mind that memory doesn't just happen to you. It doesn't just show up. There's a process involved that requires an active engagement. Now, you'll also find there are some people, it doesn't happen, it may not happen quite as much as it used to. When I say used to, I'm talking about 30 years ago. Back years ago, people who were in the Navy used Morse code when they were on ships to communicate. You don't hear too much about Morse code anymore, but that's the dots and the dashes and all that other kind of stuff. How they would learn that code, a lot of them would sleep with it plugged into their ears, just tapping the whole time. It would be da, 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 whatever it was doing, and it would unconsciously, supposedly, plug them in to easier memory skills related to that. I don't know if it worked. I never spoke with anyone about that. But that's one of the things they did on a consistent basis was listen while they were sleeping, which became helpful for some folks. It's a subliminal sort of idea. Others of us use different ways to help remember things. Like I made the reference the other day, if you can give yourself an image of a piece of information, whatever that might be, typically tends to be a little more helpful. But again, just bear in mind that memory is active. But we also have the tendency, at least some of us, depending on the circumstance, to create a false memory for ourselves. Or a variation on that would be to say that there are times when we don't remember things exactly as they may have happened. We might add something to or take something away from an experience. If you want to look at it from a much more dramatic perspective, a lot of times when individuals encounter some sort of trauma, they modify the story to help them cope in some way or other. Or a number of other psychological processes can take place that then allow them to manage or to cope with whatever trauma it was. I had a neighbor a number of years ago who we were all good buddies, and she came to our house and was telling us a story about this guy she had met at work, needed a place to stay. Her husband at the time was out of the country because he was TDY somewhere. And she said, yeah, you can stay at our house. And my first thought was, why did you let this strange dude into your house? But that wasn't the question she was asking. She made up a story about, we found out later, she told us that she had ended up having an affair with this fellow. And my first thought was, wow, your husband's not going to be too overly excited about that. And then later we came to understand, after her husband got back and some other events had taken place, that she had let this fellow stay in her house, but he had raped her. So her coping tool was to, instead of dealing with the fact that I was raped, I had an affair. I chose, which then takes the blame, and the memory gets skewed in all kinds of ways. Distorted is another way to look at that. And which part of that story is right, basically is what it boils down to. And our bodies, our brains will create for us memories, again, sometimes that are false, to help us seemingly cope with some circumstance that we've encountered. A lot of times those circumstances are traumatic, but not always. People, I'm not saying that a car accident is not traumatic, but some people view or experience a car accident in one way, but describe the story in a completely different way than what really happened in real time. Their brains create something that helps them cope. One of the conditions that will often arise in, often may be a bit of a stretch, but will occur sometimes in people who have encountered trauma, is that they can't deal with the trauma, so a different personality, literally, is manufactured, comes to the front, and assumes the persona of that event. Let me see if I can put that in some easier language. Had a conversation with a lady yesterday, and she had been hinting, without being really specific, that there was some other, I would call it some other people present with her. But she didn't make reference to them specifically. She had made reference to having been raped at this, or assault. She used the word assaulted, however long ago. And in the process of all this, she made reference to another person. She gave another name. She said, well, that must be Harry. But the name she gave me was actually a variation on her actual name. It was a shortened version. It wasn't Harry, by the way. It was a female, and it was a female's name. Okay. I said, well, that's a new name. Who is that? And she starts telling me about this 14 or 15-year-old. She's 25. The lady sitting in front of me is 25. And she's describing this 14, 15-year-old female. And da-da-da-da-da. And it's like, oh, that's kind of cool. Tell me some more about that.
Okay, so this reminds me of that movie Split. Was it kind of realistic to what you're talking about too, with multiple personalities?
I haven't seen the movie, but yes, the split is, yeah, the word is dissociate, the technical term for it, and they do split. And they end up sometimes with just one, sometimes with multiples, it depends. The oldest original movie related to that was a movie called Sybil. And it was also made into a book, I think, that was eventually made into a movie. She had 16, if I remember correctly at that time. But this young lady, then she described for me a very, very old man. When I say old, we're not talking about senior citizen old. We're talking like 100 or more years old. An old dude who had really long hair. She didn't know what his name was, but he was the one who would come and scream at her grandmother. And I thought, well, what was he upset with your grandmother for? And my thought was, okay, what's happening with your grandmother that would cause you to need somebody else to come to the front to assume that conversation with you, which was not wasn't in the scope of my interview with her. So I couldn't chase all of that. But I also said something. She kept glancing over at this chair I have in my office. I said, is he here? She said, yeah, he's sitting in that chair over there. I said, get out, for real. And I wasn't trying to minimize her circumstance or to make her feel bad or anything like that. What I was getting at is sometimes people have things show up. The psychosis arrives in the middle of an interview or whatever else, and you don't know if they're really seeing something or not. He was sitting in that chair, according to her. Cool. I said, is he upset with me? Nope. It's all good. He was just being watchful for some reason, which is often what some of those personalities will do. They become protecting or very watchful to protect the person, him or herself. A lot of those memories are not real. Her perspective on what was happening with this old guy is that he had all of these life experiences and that she would find herself in similar circumstances. And she had, in essence, foreseen them if that makes any sense. It's like she had some sort of premonition that this fellow from his memory was giving to her. Most likely what's really going on with her is, now that I've said this sort of stuff out loud and let it run again in my head, is that she is also most likely has some element related to schizophrenia, which is people when they lose certain elements related to reality testing, things are not always what they seem to them. So I don't know for sure if she actually had a different personality or if that's just part of her psychosis. Very pleasant, attractive young lady, very well put together. But she's telling me all about these people. It's like, well, where are they? Well, they're just in there. They're part of me. And that's actually true for her. And the way the research tells us about that type of personality concern, they are part of her. But he was always angry. Yes, sir.
So if he was like sitting in that chair
Mhm.
and someone like threw something at him, what would she, like what would happen in her mind?
I mean, I don't know what she would see. In other words, if I had taken my pen yesterday and pitched my pen at her, at the person in this chair, I don't know what she would have seen. I would assume that she would have seen this person get hit with this pen. I don't know. Then if that had occurred, then there's not much telling what would have come up. I mean, he might have gotten up and come after me. I've had that happen.
So my roommate and I decided
in the same
to do
office,
the
actually.
laundry stripping
There was a
that
person,
everybody's
according to my
doing on
client,
TikTok.
standing behind me with
Decided
ginormous
to do it
wings like an
with
angel.
our
And it's like,
couch cushion covers
hey,
in our
what's this person here for?
university apartment.
Oh, she's just
They
watching
are
over you.
easily
Why do I need watching over?
It
And she starts
literally
telling me
looks
all this
like they've
information.
never been
It's like, some of that was true, some of that wasn't true. But those sorts of things distort our memory processes sometimes, and we get things all jacked up, is a very layperson's way to put that. Just be mindful that your memory and how you construct those memories is an active process. Sometimes the activity may be something traumatic that alters how it is you put those pieces of information together. It can be really fascinating to watch. But again, if you don't know what it is you're watching, it may not make a whole lot of sense. Somebody just may be talking, as she said yesterday, talking out the side of her face. No, this was 2 days ago, would have been Tuesday. This lady was telling me about her brother who's sitting on the couch. Well, he just talks out the other side of his face. And it's like, what the heck is that? And that's when he's having, for her, that's how she described him having a conversation with himself, sitting on her front porch. He's just talking up a storm, nobody around. He's just chattering and having the best time, the best conversation, drinking his coffee, smoking his cigarette. He'll walk up and down the sidewalk in front of their house, just talking and having the best time. Something about his memory process is skewed in some way or other. And what he experiences in his world and what I experience in my world, let's just say, are very different. That's all I know about that. I haven't seen angels. I haven't seen people. What was the name of the movie when the kid says, I see dead people? I don't see dead people, you know. So, but again, our memories are really jacked up sometimes. Now, and I've moved a bit afield from the perspective of simply the memories related to accumulating information, because there's more to it than just accumulating information. It is about our experience. And what we end up doing is we create stories. The technical term is scheme or a schema, depending on which person you're looking at, that represent some of the events that we experience. In other words, we will often generalize our knowledge in schemes or stories that help us provide a basis for how we interpret other information. We have a similar experience another time. It's like, oh, I did it this way this time, I'm going to do it in a similar fashion this time. And we create those storylines for ourselves. Sometimes those are a little skewed, that help us deal with whatever it is we're managing. Then we link pieces of information to other pieces of information. Like I mentioned before, we do this on and on and on. But again, one of the challenges that comes up is that we don't always remember things as they truly happened. And what we do is that because of these schemes, we end up filling in the blanks with information we think should be there. Now, a good example of that would be if anybody's ever witnessed a robbery at a bank. If you've ever been in a robbery or been at a bank that was being robbed or whatever, from your television experience or movies, you know that certain things may happen in bank robberies. People may bring guns, they may shoot people or whatever else. What you may do, the cop comes up to you afterwards, tell me what happened in the middle of this robbery. And you start telling all of these events. You may not realize that you may have taken information from something else you've seen, because that's what's supposed to happen in a bank robbery, and slip that into your story. That may not be true. Same thing happens with car accidents or whatever else. We add things because certain types of events we encounter occur in a certain sequence in our minds. And so we add the pieces we need to make the story fit. But in reality, that car might not have flipped over 3 times. That car might have in fact, that car might not have flipped over at all. It might have spun around in a circle. But in your mind's eye, it rolled 3 times or whatever, because of some experience you've had. So in other words, your memory can get you. It can create all kinds of problems for you as well, which is why quote unquote eyewitness testimony in a courtroom is often discounted, because people often will not remember things exactly as they truly did happen in real time. They add stuff or take away things to help them feel better about what's going on in the circumstance. They might inflate the significance of an event. If you've been around people who squabble, who are verbally assaultive of one another, you may view the notion of people visiting with one another as normal. But for most of us, screaming and hollering is really not normal. So when it's not the way we think it should be, we add stuff. Ever think about how it is you forget? In all fairness, we forget information we don't need, which is what makes education kind of fun. Because going back to my drug reference, there's information related to the use of medication that you need to have in your head. And I hope if you're ever working on me for some reason or another, you remember what piece of information goes where, whichever drug, so that I don't die. That'll be really important. But some of the things you have to learn as a nurse, things that I've had to learn as a psychologist or whatever else, will never show up in real life. People are going to ask you, you get frustrated in high school because you have to learn how to do algebra. Well, I'm never going to use algebra. I'm going to be a farmer. Okay, maybe you won't ever do a squared plus b squared equals c squared. Okay. And if you don't need to use that, you won't remember that. It's not important. So your brain will, by itself, just let that go. But at the same time, there are other things we often need to remember that we can't, because we've got extra stuff in the way that keeps us from being able to remember what we need. Our memories decay. The actual process when we talked about short-term memory to begin with was it lasts however many seconds. If we don't do something with it, which means if we don't encode it in some way, we lose it. Will decay. It goes away. It just falls out and we don't need it because we're not using it. So it's important for us to be sure and use it to connect it to something if we're going to be requiring the need of that, or we're going to need that information later. So again, it just depends on how you look at it. One of the things that comes up with testing, when I say testing, when you have to go take a test and you're sitting in a classroom, you've got no access to materials, you're really having to provide information for this test. If you have spent the whole night trying to shove all that information into your brain so that you can spit it out for me or somebody else on this test, I promise you're not going to do as well as you think. It's not a good way to go about it. Our brains can't manage the stuffing of that amount of information all at the same time. A lot of times, the one process is called retroactive interference. And that's when our learning of new information interferes with the retrieval of older information. For example, you study Microsoft Excel for whatever reason, and you're working with that, and you're working with Excel and doing your thing, but because of the information you've learned using Excel, you forgot how to work Access, because those commands are different. Same overarching company, but the programs are different. Learning one new program has inhibited your ability to remember how to work the other program. The opposite is also true. Proactive interference occurs when our old information interferes with the learning or remembering of new information. How many of you had to, how many took a foreign language in high school? Anybody? Okay. Did you have to, or did you just do it? Okay. What year did you do it? Freshman year, junior year, what year? Sophomore. Okay. I didn't take a foreign language till I was a junior. The best time to teach somebody a new language is when they're learning the first one. You want a kid to know how to speak Spanish? Who is it? Let me rephrase. You have a Caucasian Western American who's going to speak English, we assume. You want to know the best time to teach that kid how to speak Spanish is while they're learning how to speak English. The younger the person is, the more able they are to assimilate that information. The brain's much more plastic or elastic, whichever word you want to use. You want a kid to speak 4 languages, teach all 4 of them at the same time before they go to school. It'll lock in there and they'll have it. It will never go away. Having to learn a new language when you're 15 years old, the fact that you know how to work English, if you're an English speaker initially, will mess up your ability to learn Spanish, if you're, or whatever language. I can speak a little bit of Spanish, but I promise you when I do it, the person I'm speaking with is going to laugh because the words come to my mind in English. Open the door, abra la puerta. That's open the door. It may not, in real Spanish, it may not be like that. It may be puerta abra, I don't know. You don't always, the verbs and subjects and whatnot don't function the same way in different languages. So what you may be spitting out in your English may come off to somebody else as a little bit skewed. That's because the language you've learned first interferes with your ability to process the new one. And it can be very troubling. It happens with, I would suspect, I used to get really confused with my math concepts when I was working math in high school. So theoretically, you learn how to do this, which helps you learn how to do this, which helps you learn how to do this, which helps you learn how to do that. And you keep moving and advancing in complexity. Well, sometimes you could get one of those, you know, I might do a squared plus b squared equals c squared for the wrong problem. And then if I start out from the wrong perspective, you can bank on my answer being wrong because the information has gotten confused. Now, from thinking critically, there are lots of things in play. Trauma can influence our memory, going back to the individuals who have some kind of PTSD or some kind of significant trauma, regardless of whether it's sexual or otherwise. Often we don't remember at all. It's not about another personality coming to the front. We just don't remember, which is sometimes when you find individuals who encounter therapy much later in life will have something will trigger a memory from a long time ago, and we don't know if that's real or not. What happens is that the person has put that memory in a box, shut it, taped it up, and put it under a bed somewhere. They have the word is repressed a memory. That's when we take a memory and we shove it in a box and hide it somewhere unconsciously. Now, if we take that memory and take it and put it in a box and shove it under a bed purposefully, that's a different word. That word is suppression. I know of a client from years ago when she was 4, 5, and 6, when her mother was angry with her, she would take the daughter, put her in a suitcase, and put her under the bed. So how she dealt with her own children when they misbehaved in her mind was normal. I'm not saying she put her own kids under the bed, but she didn't always understand that how she reacted to them was creating some difficulty for them because she hadn't remembered all of those events and how they occurred in a particular way. She just knew her mother was mad at her. She might not have always remembered that her mother put her under the bed. You know, I encounter all kinds of fun people. But how you recover or remember those events, again, can be very stressful. You know, I suppose that most of us at some level or other would tell you or tell me that we've encountered difficulty with our significant caregivers. All of us have. Now, to what extent each one of us is or is not damaged is not what we're talking about. What we do with the memory or the information related to that is what's important. In no way does that take away from your experience. Your world may have been quite, quote, normal for you, but it might not be normal for someone else. So the idea is trying to remember how we work with all of those pieces of information. Does all that make sense in some way or other, at least a little bit? Okay, now just so you know, there is a biochemistry that's happening when you're dealing with memory. Different memories are stored in different places in your brain. Memories related to what you see, most likely they're going to reside closer to the seeing part of your brain, which is in the occipital lobe, things like that, as an example. When we encounter certain experiences, our neurons create different synapse connections with one another to help formulate those memories. We can alter them to some degree or other, which over time then increases the neuronic connection, or in some cases depresses the connections between those neurons. If you remember that the mental or the cognitive condition referred to as Alzheimer's relates to a loss of the neurotransmitter acetylcholine. When our brains don't do well with acetylcholine, or don't produce enough, or we don't get enough from an external source, our memories will fade and our ability to remember all kinds of things will go away. If you've ever seen, and you can look it up online, you can Google images of brains or whatever related to Alzheimer's, they'll show you that there are spots in the brain that die, which means that when you're looking at the image itself, there'll be darker places, the colors don't show up the same way. And there'll be quote unquote dead places in the brain that just simply don't work anymore. What happens with those with that particular condition is that their bodies will eventually forget how to breathe. They'll suffocate. They'll forget how to swallow. So then they have to be fed with a feeding tube. And it's not that they are consciously trying to forget those things. Their bodies just stop remembering how to do that, which of course then creates a number of different challenges. If your brain doesn't communicate with your body telling it what to do, then it doesn't work. And when it doesn't work, things fail. When things fail, people die. And all of those things are related, the neurotransmitters and how they work with different pieces of information. Have you ever been around someone who's lost his or her memory from some sort of amnesia idea? There's different types of amnesia. If we damage the hippocampus, which is the piece of the brain that helps move short-term into long-term memories, what often happens is referred to as anterograde amnesia, which means that once a person has encountered the event, in many cases it happens to be a traumatic brain injury, stroke, something like that, they will not be able to create new memories. Meaning, one example I read in some textbook somewhere, there's a guy stopped at the hospital, he has a doctor's appointment with his neurologist, and the doctor introduces himself and he goes on about his business. They do their appointment, he walks off and he encounters the doctor again on a different floor for whatever reason. He'll do the same thing again. He'll introduce himself because he hasn't formed a long-standing memory related to the event he's just experienced. The inability to create new memories that occurs after some sort of event. Retrograde amnesia, of course, is just the opposite. We don't remember what's happened before the incident, whatever it happens to be. If you're not careful, you'll get those upside down. But what's really fun is when you encounter individuals who have both of them at the same time, both retro and anterograde. They can't tell you what happened before the event, and they haven't been able to form new memories past the event. So they're kind of in a place of limbo. Now, can they remember things way, way back before the event? Sure, but they don't remember. In other words, if somebody has a car accident and they bonk their head in a certain way, they may not remember what was happening as they moved into that accident. In other words, they may not remember that their little child Bessie was in the back seat and mama was reaching back there trying to smack Bessie for some reason because she was acting stupid. I don't know. They have this car accident. She may not remember that. That'd be retrograde amnesia. doesn't remember what happens before. She may not remember exactly what was happening till she came to, as it were. Again, it depends on how individuals process the information itself. Now, the next piece of information is about, I'm going to couch it in language that should be much more helpful to you from a studying perspective. If you need to remember information, there are wonderful ways to do that. Again, it depends on how you want to fix it for yourself. I told you the other day about the method of loci. If you need to remember your list, you want to be sure and remember to get a loaf of bread. Put the loaf of bread on the arm of your couch or something in your mind's eye. You'll remember the loaf of bread. That's the method of loci. When it comes to longer term memories, you can create mnemonics. The whole process of mnemonics is basically how we organize our information so we can remember. You can use acronyms, create letters. You can create hooks in your mind's eye. Hook number 1 is for this information, da, 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 da. Hook number 2 is for that information. Things like that. Now, some of your teachers would really faunch when I say this. It's really not necessary to read all the words in the book. It is not necessary. Not in my textbook, not anybody's textbook, or any book at all. Depending on what you need the book for. If you need the book for certain types of information, go get that information out of the book and leave the rest. If you need to get the general sense of a book, there are ways to take that book apart without having to read it from front to back to get the idea. Read the table of contents. Read the ending of the book. Start each chapter and read the first 2 or 3 paragraphs and get a feel for what's happening in that chapter, move to the next one. You don't get the big pieces out and leave the minutia that you might not need. Yes, somebody started to say something. Either that or my brain.
I'm thinking about a report, a report. You do that if you haven't read the book.
I didn't, to me, I heard some garble. Could you speak it again for me, please? Can you say it for me?
Talking about a book report.
Okay.
A book I've read.
Okay.
That would work.
Yes. Okay. I see what you're asking. Yeah. If you're working on a book report, pull out what you need. If you ever have to read research articles for a paper you're working on, don't read the article. Gracious, no. Get the information you need for the reference, who wrote it, what publication it's in, all that kind of stuff, and then go to the part of the article where it says discussion. Because the front part of the article is going to tell you, this is what we're going to tell you all about in this study. And then this is how we did the study. We talked to 45,000 people about this, this, and this, and we did this, and this, and this, and this. Does that help your paper? No. The discussion section says, this is what we found out. That's what you want. You don't need the 14 pages before. One of my supervisors, when I was interning, was frustrated with an article that he had sent off for publication. He's very well published. He's a professor at Midwestern, yada, 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 a nice guy. Heck of a nice fellow, great clinician. The editor for the journal that he sent it to took out 9 pages of his article. 9 full pages. And he said, and what pissed me off about that is that when I read the paper, the article again, it made perfectly good sense without those 9 pages. So that's when I got mad. I had added all this extra stuff that he didn't need for this paper. It still got published, but it was just shorter. We often add stuff we don't have to have. So when you're looking at big articles and things like that, go to the discussion section. You need to do a book report, pull out the big pieces. Don't worry about reading every dot and tittle. Now, when you were in high school and you had to read novels for your English class or whatever, the reason you were reading a novel was because of the generalized subject material of the book, not because you needed to know what time of day Frodo walked through whichever cave. That's not important. You're dealing with a larger idea. Look for the bigger pieces, not the smaller ones. Are there certain, but at the same time, if you're having to deal with minutia related to a piece of medication, learn the minutia. It's one thing to talk about neurotransmitters, but it's another thing to talk about dopamine. Dopamine is very specific, not just a neurotransmitter. So you have to, when it comes to learning and memory for stuff like that, you have to know why you're engaging the material. General psychology is a class that has a box beside it you have to check off to get out of earning college. I know that. You have to take general psychology or you have to take sociology to get out. One or the other. And the good doctor who teaches psychology is an exceptional instructor. Okay, great. Go take that class. I'm fine with that. I'm not teaching you details. I'm teaching you big pieces. And I'm giving you a big scatter shot about what happens in generalized psychological information. A bachelor's degree in psychology is the table of contents to the book. If you want to know something about psychology, you're going to have to get a master's degree. If you really want to know something about psychology, you're going to have to get a doctorate. Y'all aren't going to do that. So I'm not teaching you those little bitty pieces like that. I'm giving you the bigger hunks. Just be mindful about what those pieces of information what you're going to use them for, which is why when we do tests, I don't worry about you using your materials. I'm assuming you are. If you're not, that's on you. I'm happy. If you don't want to use your book, knock yourself out. But I'm assuming you're going to use your book. I'm sorry?
I didn't know we were allowed to do that.
Now, I appreciate your honesty. Yeah, please do. Yeah. I mean, I would have, and again, maybe it's a bad assumption on my part. I don't know if I've ever encountered a student who said, I didn't know we could, so I didn't. Because I'm assuming that you thought you were cheating. Okay, I appreciate that, but please feel free. And that's not, that's impressive. Thank you. And I'm not trying to make it a bigger deal than it is, but that's kind of important to me. Thanks. You know, working on. Yeah, your grade's about to come up. Okay, no worries. Yeah, use it for quizzes, use it for your tests. Heck yeah. Now, don't forget, if I remember right, and if I don't have it loaded, don't say anything about it. If the lockdown browser is loaded, you can't dig up information while you're taking that test because it's going to lock your computer out, right? Does your phone access the interweb? I can't keep you from using your phone while you're taking a test. Now, I would tell you this. Don't use your phone to take the test. It'll kick you out. When you take a test, take it on a computer, a laptop in a computer lab, something. But again, where you get the information, it's la, 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 la. I don't even know. Now, what I can tell by a couple of looks that I'm getting, that the thought of doing that never crossed your mind, which means that I have just empowered your ability to cheat. So if I told y'all early in the semester, Dr. Hamilton's class is probably the easiest class you'll ever get when it comes to getting an A. Just do your work. Do your work and turn it in on time, you're golden. That's all. And that's exactly what I meant. Just so you know, from a memory perspective, the memories you have with other instructors suggest to you that you are to do things a certain way. So you have done them that way, right? Now, I communicated in a way that I thought was pretty clear, but evidently it wasn't, and that's fine. I'll know better. That's different, that adjusts that memory process for you. I don't need you to remember the dots and tittles. If I need you to find one, I'll tell you where it is and I'll send you to go get it. But I'm not gonna, the information you need for your signature assignment or the common assignment's a good example. Some of that's really specific. I gave it to you. I gave you the information. It's either in the case study or it came out of my mouth, one or the other. I gave it because there's not any point in me having to teach you that. Y'all don't need to know how to compute a full-scale IQ. So I give you the quick down and dirty way, add those up and divide by 4. Boom, you're done, move on. But doing it that way fulfills part of the assignment requirement that I have to do. I have to be able to demonstrate that you can add, basically. There's a math piece. So we put it in there. The sociology teacher constructed an actual research thing that her classes do. They gather research, they do the research part, which is how she designed her assignment. Mine works differently. Okay, no worries. But we all end up at the same place. We all fulfill whatever requirement is necessary. So be sure and remember, use your head. When you're dealing with questions you're trying to learn or remember or memorize or whatever else related to schoolwork, why do you need to know it? Now, if you have to know it well enough to spit it out for a test, then you have to do that. You get enough of it in there to be able to spit it back out. If you're going to have to write about it, you're going to have to learn it a different way. In Dr. Hamilton's class, if you're doing multiple choice quizzes and tests and whatnot, just look for the answer and click it and go. I don't need you to know why, just go get it. If there are things that you encounter you want to know about, in other words, you want to know why, great, tell me what those are and we'll talk about them. I'm happy to do that. What's going to happen is this, I don't remember what the next chapter is, but as we get closer to unpacking specific diagnoses and counseling or therapeutic interventions and all that other kind of stuff, you're going to start being aware of people you know, people you've encountered, or conditions that you're curious about. Me telling you about the lady I visited with yesterday who had a couple extra personalities is going to pique your curiosity, and you can ask me about that later. I've got more than one of those clients to tell you about. I've had people see all kinds of strange things in my office that I promise you are not there. They were not there. Sometimes they try to fool you, try to make you think they're seeing things that aren't there. When we start getting into that kind of stuff, y'all are going to go, some of this stuff is absolutely fascinating. If you're into that, you know, if you're not into that, it's just extra piece of information for you. But some of you will plug that information in such a way that it becomes really beneficial for you. I'll be the first person to tell you, when it came to, I ended up in psychology by accident. I thought having a degree in psychology was the dumbest thing I ever heard in my life. And really never even seriously considered it till after I already had a bachelor's degree. But I was also a late bloomer. I didn't do education until I was 30 of any significance. Now, when I started going back to school again, when I was 29, I went for 17 years without stopping to get in there. I got paper along the way. Once I got rolling, it all made perfectly good sense. And one thing just built and led to another. And here we are. But coming to understand why people do what they do when they do it is fascinating. If you think about it.
I always heard that, like, I heard the time that your mind, like, if somebody says, I'm seeing flying little pigs flying around the room, that's not a real, what do you call it? That's not a real illusion or whatever.
Oh.
Like, if somebody says there's a big black or a big elephant in the room, that it's true. Really seeing the big elephant. Is that right?
Okay, I think what you're asking, let me give you a different example and see if I'm right. There's a person who is in a room and they see a man standing in the corner. Okay, you're looking at a corner and you see a man in the corner. What's really in the corner is a hat rack. But the way that person perceives that information, it looks like a person. Is that what you're asking? Okay, that's called an illusion of reference. The information they're processing it in, I can't always tell you why, but for whatever reason, they're processing that information and their mental condition, their emotional concerns or whatever else, translate that information in their brain to a person. That probably is suggestive of something somewhat paranoid-like, that somebody would be watching or whatever else. But yes, that is a real thing. It sure is. People can misperceive things and see stuff, you know, and if you encounter someone, one of the things I learned early on, somebody tells you that there's a flying pig in the room, the easiest thing to do at first, play along. the first response of no, there's not is not going to be helpful, because that person is seeing a pig fly through the room. At least your understanding of it is at first. Now, if you figure out they're lying to you, that's something else. We can talk about how to mess with that. The best one is when I had a guy talking to a fellow. I was interviewing him, and he starts looking up over my shoulder and starts mumbling, talking to somebody he's seeing up behind my head. I said, who are you talking to? And he called his name. I said, what's he want? He told me not to tell you anything else. So when you tell him to butt a stump, he's not in charge here, I am. And he kind of shook his head and said, what? I said, he's not in charge, pay attention to me. And so he did. A little bit later, he wanders back up and starts chattering. Hey, whoop, back here, dude. Come on. Back here on the planet with the rest of us. Nothing happening up there. Pay attention. And I gave him a screening tool later that would give me information that would suggest a particular type of disorder. In my mind, I thought he was yanking my chain. I thought he was faking. This particular screening instrument suggested that he was. Now, it doesn't make me brilliant. I just happen to think the guy was lying to me. And I chased it a little bit and come to find out, most likely he was. But there are also just as many times, like that girl yesterday, I'm telling you what, that old dude was sitting in that chair for her. She was convinced. As sure as I'm looking at you wearing a purple tie, she saw him sitting in that chair. I had a dissociative client who had 4 personalities. I could tell you which one was with me on the couch by what she wore. She saw all kinds of crazy stuff. Oh yeah. And for her, some of those things were just as real as punch. But other times they're not. And again, you have to learn over time how to distinguish between those things, but that's added information for another time. What else can I help you with today? Just remember that your memory stuff is active, that you don't always get it from a passive perspective. You have to engage, and the more information you can connect to other pieces of information, the better off it's going to connect. Yes, sir.
The like putting bread on the couch, was that
Method of loci,
how you spell it?
just like it sounds, LOCI. And you might actually pronounce it loci, I don't know, but for me it's loci. What else today? Well, run off, live long, prosper, have some fun, whatever it is you do. If you have any question about your signature assignment, just give me a shout. I'm around. See you, bye. You too. All you folks on the line, have a nice time. Enjoy your day.
Have a good day, Doc.